When it comes to movie auteurs, like the author theory of movie directors, you have two basic categories, right? So on the one side, you have your Kubricks, your Tarkovskis, your Rossellini, Pasolini, Fellini, Truffaut, Hitchcock, Murnau, Eisenstein, David Cronenberg, John Carpenter, George Romero. So authors, people who have a unique vision, a unique style, true artists of the cinematic craft. And on the other side, you have your Ed Woods, your Luigi Cozzi, your Jess Franco, that style of author, people who have the heart, usually the heart, they have the vision, generally speaking. Yes, so they have the heart and the vision. What they don't have is this, what is it exactly? Is it talent? Is it skill? There is perhaps no better representative of that second category of, of author, talking about Jean Rollin. And today we'll be talking about one of Jean Rollin's most perfect movies, most fascinating movies. It's The Grapes of Death, Les Raisins de la Mort, from 1978. So if you don't know Jean Rollin, he's quite a famous cult director, but very cult. He's not a well-known figure. So Jean Rollin is the Ronsard of the lesbian vampire movie. He is the pornographer king of exploitation cinema. He is, is he a real author? Is he a cynical XXX hardcore director? Is he a talentless hack? Well, yes, and yes. He's all these things, except yes and no, because it's not fair, actually, to say he's talentless. Certainly, well, let's just say that he is non-conventionally talented. He is talently challenged. He is talented on the inside. So today we will look at the what those insights reveal to us. The Grapes of Death, I actually like that one a lot. I've seen 4 Jean Rollin movies so far. As I mentioned, usually they're more like vampire movies, lesbian vampire movies in particular. This is his zombie movie. It's a very good introduction to the movies of Jean Rollin, because this one is actually pretty enjoyable in its own right, while retaining many of the flaws of Jean Rollin, which make his work so unique and, in a sense, poetic. Like the flaws make it poetic in a certain sense. Anyway, what's the story? Well, it begins with, like farmers on a field, but like farm workers, really, working on an industrial farm, and they are spraying pesticides, like thick clouds of ominous-looking pesticides, and they're basically dressed like in hazmat suits. It seems pretty pretty deleterious to human health, this pesticide, which they are spraying in the aforementioned grapes of soon-to-be death. Right off the bat, one of the workers, he's atrociously sick, and he is displaying some subtle signs of zombistry, zombieitis, like the Latin medical term for turning into a zombie. And things are looking pretty bad, but lo, we cut to a train that is traveling the countryside, and a deserted train. It seems like a sort of Marie Celeste train, and a lone woman is stalked by a nefarious man who is seemingly very interested in her virtue. Like he has ill intent towards her chastity. So she runs away from this train and she runs in the countryside and she arrives in a deserted village. At first, she doesn't see anybody, but it would have been better if she had never discovered what happened to the inhabitants of this city, this small town, actually. She discovers the empty city, people turn into zombies, and there's extreme gore, and plenty of stuff happens. And will she survive? What will happen to the entire French countryside? Well, you watch it and find out. It's super good. It's super enjoyable. It is very cheesy. It is quite a low-budget movie, and it shows lots of signs of almost incompetence, like very disputable incompetence. But as I mentioned, all of these things are part of the Jean Rollin charm, and as we will see, he's a lot more talented, actually, than we gave him credit for. Generally speaking, the beginning is really very successful in building this atmosphere of mystery and dread, which is really the quintessential flavor of a Jean Rollin movie. On top of that, the desert train sequence is very effective, like even as a piece of suspense. That worked really well. Jean Rollin, again, he gravitates towards atmosphere, right? So when he creates a suspense scene, he's making a suspense scene, but that is filled with a sort of dream-like, magic, like a nightmare quality. So again, that's a big part of the flavor of a Jean Rollin movie, and we definitely have that in here. And it's not always successful in all of his movies, but here it is. Like, it works really well. And on top of that, so what contributes to the establishing this atmosphere, this dreamy atmosphere, is that the visuals are great, just like the photography. There's a lot of natural sets, like, the countryside and stuff like that. And we also spend a lot of time in a real small town, like an old small town in France. It's very effective. It kind of reminds me of like in Dagon, for instance, or Who Would Kill the Child, the 1970s very intense, horror movie, like children slasher movie, which takes place in, I think it's in Spain as well. So we have the same kind of thing here. We have an actual small town, and it works really well. Okay, so the visual, generally speaking, the mist and all that stuff, that works really well. It is still, first of all, a cheap exploitation movie, and again, that's a huge part of the Jean Rollin appeal. He's always striving, he's clearly striving for an authentic, heartfelt, almost like spiritual, aesthetic, objective. He's striving to create a true work of art, but he does so in a medium which is built on gratuitous nudity, like copious amounts of gratuitous, flesh, the naked ladies, and grotesque levels of gore, like absurdly grotesque gore. There's sort of a level of gore you might have in a Fulci movie, which is so over the top, like Herschel Gordon Lewis levels of gore. Like it's not natural. It's not meant to be realistic. It's not like Tom Savini is trying to make his zombies look like actual dead people. This is like a psychedelic version of an exploding head type of of over the top gore. But that again, that ends up being like this absurd poem about grotesque over the top states and situations. And I don't know, it just works. It has a little bit of the 70s Herzog quality with a dreamy, feel mixed with the grotesque aspect of something like Even Dwarves Started Small or something like that. But here the grotesque is really in your face, right? Again, with that nudity and that violence, and the fact that on the face of it, it's really cynical. And the fact, it's cynical, but he plays it so frankly, in a sense, like he's seeming like so unashamed of just how gratuitous and over the top the sex scenes and the nudity and the violence is, that lack of of shame, so it ends up playing like part of the poetry. I don't know. I like it. Okay. So we also have Brigitte Lahaye in this movie. So she's a big star. She used to be, certainly. She's the French queen of the XXX movie. Like, she's truly a legend, actually, like in France. And she played in quite a few of Jean Rollin's movie, including some of his XXX movies, which he did, film. But she also played in his horror movies, his non-pornographic movies, such as this one. And he cast her because even though she wasn't certainly a technically trained actress, and as a classical thespian she had her limitations, she also had a very particular quality. Like, she definitely had that star power, it factor, and she had a strange mystery to her. She is a fascinating person. She exudes something quite charismatic and powerful. So even though she's not good, as an actress, she still works very well in all these movies. She's in this. She's not in here a lot. She appears at minute 51. She's not there for the whole movie, but she definitely, raises the movie by being there. It's very cool that she's here. Okay. And what about the message, if you like, of the movie? So there is definitely one. First of all, it has to be said that the movie has a very blunt, very beating you on top of the head message about, the environment and the evil of capitalism and, exploitation of, immigrants and stuff like that. And no matter what you feel about those issues, this is not a subtle movie. In any way, shape, or form. Like, this one truly beats you over the head with it, though, for a zombie movie, beating you over the head is kind of appropriate. By the way, if you want to see a good movie with the same theme, like a good zombie movie with an environmental message and anti-capitalist, the whole thing, but that works well on that level, Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue. I will do a video on that someday. Anyway, but this movie has that, but it works a lot better when its message is more subdued. It's when it is delivered more poetically. And actually, it doesn't need to be over the head on the message. Like, the movie kind of, we get it. We got the message before that, but there's more to the message than that overt political, allegory. And in particular, you see it in the moral, despair of the zombies, because we do see some people turning into zombies. That's kind of a mainstay of the zombie movie, like the victim turning into a zombie and feeling his or her humanity, vanishing. That whole thing worked very well in Return of the Living Dead. Many zombie movies play with that, almost all of them. But here, it's like they play more on the despair of it. It has an existential quality to it that is pretty unique to this one. Like, they all have a flavor of it, but this one, you truly, it's more feeling like the loss. Yeah, that works very well. And generally speaking, the story is pretty good overall. One thing I will say is that usually the Jean Rollin movies are quite long, like they're very slow moving. Okay, they are almost a caricature of taking too long. Okay, so every shot seems like it's 5 seconds too long. Like they should cut earlier and they just don't. But when you watch an entire Jean Rollin movie, when he pulls it off, I mean, when it works, that exaggerated slow pace, which might come from a form of incompetence or poor, judgment in the editing room, it actually ends up working. I mean, that's a big part of what establishes the tone of the movie. So if you can make it through, eventually it kind of like grows on you and puts you in a sort of meditative state. And this meditative poetic state is what Jean Rollin is really known for. It's the fact that he does these cheap exploitation movies with, gratuitous, sex and violence, but in what are clearly poetic movies because they create that, sensation. And this one definitely does that, but also it's not quite as slow. So that's why it's a good first movie if you've never seen a Jean Rollin movie, because though it is still, a glacially paced piece of cinema compared certainly to today, and even back then it was slow, but it's not as slow as some of the others, like Fascination I mentioned, or Night of the Hunted, which I liked a lot actually. But anyway, that one is really slow, and that one had very, very, very long, like sex scenes, like 20-25 minutes of sex scenes with Brigitte Lahaie. That's good, but that's fine, but it certainly doesn't help the pace of your story. Okay, and Night of the Hunted suffered because of that. Whereas here, none of that really. I mean, there is some nudity, but the pace is pretty good. The drawn-out quality of Jean Rollin's aesthetic is not quite as drawn-out in his other movies, so it just works better. It's a little bit quicker. It's an easier dosage, if you like, of Jean Rollin for a first-timer. I mentioned a few very good sequences. So I mentioned the desert train sequence with the evil stalker. That is really very cool. That works super well. But there's an even better sequence, a couple actually, that involves the desert village. There's one sequence in particular which is very, very powerful and effective, which is, generally speaking, not to spoil the whole thing, but our heroine finds a blind girl, like in an abandoned house, and by that time, she enters the house, and by that time the zombies have come out, and so she's running away from the zombies, and the blind girl, she doesn't know about the zombies. She knows something is wrong, but she doesn't know about the zombies, and she doesn't where is everybody? Where has everybody gone, right? And the heroine, she doesn't want to scare the blind girl, so she takes her by the hand, and they walk off together in the deserted village. And so she's blind, obviously she doesn't see anything, and she's like, well, where is everybody? What's happened? What's going on? And of course, we can see just fine, and the grounds of the town, the village, are littered with dead people. So it's full of gore and blood and exploded head, and so they're walking, trying to. So the girl who can see, she's helping the blind girl not step into poodles of gore, right? And she's like, no, everything is fine. There's nothing here. Everything is beautiful. It's a beautiful day. Everything is just fine. No. There's no need to worry. And so that whole sequence of the blind girl going, what's wrong? I can feel something is wrong. And the seeing girl who can see just fine, she keeps saying, no, everything is fine. No need to worry. No, everything is cool. That, poetically, that is supremely effective. There's really a very powerful, again, image, allegory. It's almost like a fairy tale quality. It has that, fairy tale quality that speak to the deepest parts of our psyche. So it's very, very, very effective, that sequence. So you have that, and generally speaking, the whole movie is pretty effective. Again, it is kind of slow, and yeah, sure, the gore is so over the top that it is kind of ridiculous. But if you go with it, and if you accept that it is like a sort of exploitative fairy tale, but a fairy tale nonetheless, well, then it works really, really well. And just to conclude, I think it's really interesting to compare, because we started is Jean Rollin an author, and that has been disputed. Certainly, I've had a lot of friends. I've known people who said he was, and I've had very good friends who thought it was laughable that Jean Rollin might be considered an author, because certainly back in the day when we used to watch movies on VHS, the transfers used to be terrible, and pan and scan version and poor copies, so they look terrible, and because they're so drawn out, they did not work in all cheap, VHS, pan and scan, bad copies. Such copies do not work. Okay, Jean Rollin does not work on a cheap, VHS. But when you watch a good copy of it, it actually works really well, and it's interesting to compare with somebody like Joe D'Amato, because Joe D'Amato is very, very comparable to Jean Rollin, actually, because he did a lot of movies of multiple genres, but he also did a lot of horror movies, and he also did a lot of XXX movies, a lot of porno. Joe D'Amato did, and for instance, Anthropophagus, Grim Reaper, I think it's called in English. That's also a good comparison, because Joe D'Amato did the same thing as Jean Rollin did, right? If you can't compete on production value, compete by having a super grotesque sequence, like have gratuitous nudity and the most over-the-top gore you can imagine. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, and Joe D'Amato certainly did that. Again, Grim Reaper, like the poster of Anthropophagus, Grim Reaper, Joe D'Amato's Grim Reaper, is a guy with his belly open and his guts flowing out, and he is eating his own guts, right? Which is an actual scene from the movie. Spoilers. So yeah, he's not going for subtlety, and the movie is kind of built. Anthropophagus is kind of built on 3 or 4 sequences of that type, of that level. But the thing is that Joe D'Amato is a much, much, much more competent filmmaker than Jean Rollin, and even though his horror movies or his sexploitation movies, not the XXX, but like the Black Emanuel movies, oftentimes the photography isn't that great, like the lighting is not very good, and things like that. But generally speaking, Joe D'Amato, Aristide Massachesi, is a very, very competent, very good technical director, and he did like a lot of movies. But even though there are plenty of his movies which I enjoy a lot, like Endgame, for instance, a sort of Mad Max ripoff, which I like a lot, you might like a Joe D'Amato movie. You might be impressed by the audacity, certainly, of some of his choices, but you will never tell yourself that Joe D'Amato, what an author he is. There is nothing authorly about Joe D'Amato. This guy doesn't have a single integrity bone in his body, okay? He is not an artist, okay? Or Jess Franco, Jess Franco, sometimes he's kind of like in the middle, because his movies sometimes are incompetent, sometimes they're quite competent, sometimes they're very atmospheric, sometimes they're like dreary, unwatchable, and sometimes they feel very sincere, like Vampiros Lesbos. It's obviously trashy, but I think it works really well. Like the first Dr. Orlov movie, like Gritos en las Noches, I think. Well, Dr. Orlov, the first one. And there's a lot of good, ultimately speaking, Jess Franco movies, and sometimes he kind of feels like an author, but sometimes, and probably more often, he comes off like just a hack. He's making, 6 movies a year. Sometimes it's the same movies, just re-editing, 3-4 times under different titles. So there is a form of cynicism in Jess Franco. Not always, but often. Whereas Jean Rollin, who is of those 3, certainly the least talented, okay, he is artistically the most consistent. So Joe D'Amato is never an author, and Jess Franco is sometimes an author. But I think certainly of the 4 movies I've seen so far, Jean Rollin is always, trying to express something from within his own heart and his own soul, And it just so happened that for him, the way he found to express his heart and soul was, cheap exploitation movies with gratuitous nudity and over-the-top grotesque gore, and long takes that should cut 5 seconds earlier. But I like that. I think it works, and I admire that. And as I said, he's not conventionally talented, but he has a talent all his own. He has a Jean Rollin-shaped talent, which only he could fill, and I love him for that. So thank you, Jean Rollin. And that one is a zombie movie, wine-making zombies. How cool is that? So if you want to encourage my work, I'm on Patreon, yes. So very cool of you. It is tremendously appreciated. So thank you to everyone who is supporting me on Patreon. Thank you for everyone who is watching me here. The videos are put on Patreon a bit earlier. Anyway, I hope you're doing great. If you are a winemaker, do make sure not to spread any zombie-creating pesticides on your grapes. And you do you, but just friendly advice. Do not spread the zombie-making pesticides on your grapes. And anyway, till next time, keep watching the skies, live long and prosper. Take care.